that I've been here. So, can I have the first slide? And what I'm going to tell you is some vignettes, but I'm going to start. Can I have the next slide, Sebastian? So, if you had told me that our kids would be where they are right now, 20 years ago, I would have told you that you were out of your effing mind. Because they weren't the easiest kids to raise. Maybe they'd be here, but the one in the middle had surgery scheduled. He was doing the surgery at Stanford all day. Our daughter is in rehearsal for an off-Broadway play in New York. Sandy reminds me this is an off-Broadway play. But she's very happy that she's now, and she's working as well as an intern at the New York Theater or some workshop or something like that. And our middle son, who's on the right, you're right, was actually supposed to be here, and he's tied up because the flight from Fort Lauderdale got delayed. And he has been very, very successful as a federal prosecutor in Miami. In fact, he recently had somebody sentenced to 351 years, a 36-year-old, and I said, 351 years? I mean, what do you need the 1 year for? I mean, what's that all about? So I show you this because who the hell would have predicted this? Nobody would have. I certainly would have, and I guarantee Sandy, and more importantly, my mother wouldn't have predicted it either. So let me show you the next slide. This was our department in 1995. So this was 1 year that I've been here 1 year. Recall that when I came, Bob Bauman was the only pediatric neurologist. Kevin Nelson was reading EEGs. We had no epileptologist. There was nobody that was doing MS. Unfortunately, I don't have a pointer, but John Slevin, I mean, that's just a terrific picture. The first recruit to the department was Will Maragos, who's way over on the right in the first row. And Will was working with Ann Young at the time. Ann Young was then, I guess Ann was still in Michigan, but she became the chair at Mass General. And Ann said very nice things about Will, but I called other friends of mine at the University of Michigan, and there was sort of lukewarm. But Will turned out to be terrific. And Steve Minger was next to him. Steve, by the way, is now the head of healthcare research at GE, but he started all the stem cell research. The big stem cell research program at the university in the United Kingdom is because of Steve Menger. And the second recruit to the department was sandwiched between Ed and John, and that's Eddie Trevathan. And Eddie came to be our epileptologist, and the way I recruited Eddie was out of a private practice in Atlanta. He was part of a 5-man group in Atlanta. He was unhappy doing that. He wanted to be an academic neurologist. He had some ties to Kentucky, and he came here, and he stayed for quite a while, and then went to WashU, ultimately became the head of pediatric neurology there, and then went to the CDC, and is now the dean of the School of Public Health at St. Louis University. But this was the department then. We had 7 residents in 12 slots. So our residency wasn't completely filled out. And I don't know if you guys remember these residents. The second from the left is Sujata Goody, who now is in Pikeville. Doug and Chris, the two on the right, are now in the Tri-Cities area, I think, down in Tennessee. Susie ended up doing ophthalmology in Louisville, and then the other two left for other reasons, and I won't go into it. So that was the department in 1995. And if I could have the next slide. So this is the most recent picture of our department. Not everybody's there. So I show this because it takes me back to what I was saying about the children. In essence, who would have thought? Who could have predicted we would be where we were? It was something that I hoped for but it was totally unpredictable. And I must say that the department has been simply terrific. And I'll just read something that I've written here. Despite the fact that I've heard secondhand that some administrators are at best lukewarm about the Department of Neurology, I personally think that the demands for our service, the close relationships we have with our colleagues in the community, and several of them are here this evening, our contribution margin to the institution, our RVU generation, the quality of our residents and faculty, and most importantly, the respect of UK neurology by the academic neurology community nationally and internationally are sufficiently compelling evidence of the high quality of the Department of Neurology at the University of Kentucky. The training and clinical care that we administer rivals that of any institution anywhere in the world. And really that is that's because of the faculty and the residents that we have and the staff that we have. Just terrific individuals. And the department has had terrific products. I mean, people that have gone on to great things. Some of our former residents are here tonight, like Bilal and Sebastian Espinoza and Nicole Everman and Dr. Nagwa Mahari. You know, I'll tell you more about Dr. Mahari in a second. But, I mean, these people have been terrific and made tremendous contributions to the community at large, and in some instances the international community, certainly with respect to Sebastian and with respect to Nagwa. Tarves Tucker, Cal Avison, Avi Nath, Eddie Trevathan, Mike Hoffman, Anand Vashnev, Steve Minger, just a few of the people who've come through the department, aren't here any longer, but reflect very, very positively on the Department of Neurology. You know, it's been said that one lives vicariously through your children, and there's some truth to that. I've certainly, and I think Sandy to some degree, have lived vicariously through the accomplishments of our children, but I must tell you that I live vicariously through the accomplishments of our residents, our fellows, and of our faculty. And I really mean it when I say to people that I bask in the light that reflects off you. You know, I've always wanted, the most important thing to me has been your success. That makes me successful. So that's been great. No, so there are two Yiddish words that I'd like you to learn. Creed Pettigrew's here. Creed has a lot of Yiddish in his vernacular. He never gets the pronunciation right. But he usually uses it in the right context. And I've always meant to buy him a copy of Leo Rostin's The Joys of Yiddish. And if you don't have it, Creed, I'm going to get it for you next Christmas. So it turns out that there are two words. One is tikvel, and Judy knows what this is. And the other is nachas. Tikvel is, you know, you can't really translate some languages well into English. And Yiddish is one of them that doesn't translate real well. But kvel means to burst with pride. And, you know, when your kids do something phenomenal, you know, when they graduate from college, you kvel. And nachas is a tremendous abundance of joy. So your grandmother, you know, she experiences nachas at your children's weddings or when you have a baby. And I can tell you that I feel very much in that regard that you know, I fell over the department. It's a verb. And I have tremendous nachas from the department. You know, it's just a terrific group of people. Okay. So slide 6. So it turns out that when I decided to take this job, there was only one person in the department that I actually knew. Why did I know him? Because he happened to do AIDS research. And that was Fred Schmidt. And I guess Fred's not here tonight. Now, that's unfortunate. So Fred had written this lovely paper in the New England Journal on the use of AZT and AIDS dementia. I knew Fred from his work, and I also knew Fred from our meetings, and I thought Fred was simply a terrific person to have in a department, but I didn't know any of the other department members, and the one thing I knew was that if the faculty was anything like Fred, this was a great place to come. And it turned out that the faculty was every bit like Fred, and it was a terrific place to come. So it turned out to be a great choice for me. When we were being recruited, Sandy and I were taken to a lot of Christmas parties. There's a tradition, it was a much bigger tradition 18 years ago when I first came than it is currently, where every department had a Christmas party, and people from other departments would show up at the Christmas parties. Nowadays, you know, people say, oh, what the hell do I want to do that for? But it was a big deal. And they dragged me to a lot of Christmas parties, and we get back on the plane. This was our second visit. And I turned to her and I said, I like Kentucky. I actually like Kentucky, and I think we'll move there. And she said, these were her exact words, having met all these people, by the way, she said, I don't think Kentucky is ready for you. That's what she said. She said, I don't think Kentucky is ready for you. So she wasn't the only one. Next slide. So I told some friends, and I'm getting ahead of myself, and I'll tell you why in a second. Among them was Jay Levy. Now, I suspect that very few of you, if any, know who Jay Levy is, but Jay is a very close friend of mine, and Jay should have won the Nobel Prize, because Jay found the AIDS virus without any assistance whatsoever. He published it within weeks of the publication of Gallo and Montagnier, and he's an oncologist and medical virologist at the University of California, San Francisco. And I told Jay that I was going to move to Kentucky, and this is what he said. He said, I give you no more than 2 years in Kentucky, then you're back on the East Coast. And here it is 18 years later, you know, I'm still in Kentucky, although they're trying to get rid of me. Anyhow, okay, so the next slide. So the first person I tell we're moving to Kentucky is Sandy. The second person I tell I'm moving to Kentucky is this lady right here. And I suspect, I don't know if we have any radiologists in the audience. She is actually, this is Judy Post, and behind her is Tom Post. This is actually taken at the castle because Tom and Judy own the castle, you know, that monstrosity out by the airport. And Judy is a radiologist at the University of Miami. And for years, every Tuesday morning, Judy and I would read films together. I'd take all my AIDS patients' films, because these were the old days, you had films. I'd go down there and I'd read films with Judy first thing in the morning, and she'd tell me what she thought. So I told Sandy Monday night I'm moving to Kentucky, and Tuesday morning the second person I tell is Judy Post. We're reading films, we're throwing them up. She goes, you're moving to Kentucky, with a very thick Boston accent. She says, you're moving to Kentucky? I went to medical school in Kentucky. I said, and by the way, she's now a distinguished alum because I put her up for it. I put her up and Ed Oldfield up for it. And I said, Judy, how is that you ended up in Kentucky? She said, they were looking, I was in college in Connecticut, they were looking for women at the University of Kentucky, and I applied, and I decided to go there. I married Tom Post, who's from Lexington, Kentucky, and so Tom, by the way, you know what, I screwed this story up. Let me back I thought so because I've heard the story. Yeah, I told you. Here's the deal. Sandy and I, on like a Sunday night, go to Jonathan's with Frank Butler, who at the time was the hospital director, and the guy who had all the money, his wife, Emery Wilson, and his wife. And we were being courted, and in the course of conversation, they start talking about the Rupp Arena. I had no idea what the Rupp Arena was. In fact, I thought they said the Rump Arena. So I said, you know, you guys in Kentucky have some strange sports. What the hell is the Rump Arena? And he said, oh, this is fantastic. You obviously don't follow college basketball. And I said, you know, you're absolutely right. I don't follow college basketball. I could care less about college basketball. So that's great because we can give you labs, we can give you money, we can give you lines for recruitment. We can't give you basketball tickets. We can't get you basketball, and obviously you don't need basketball tickets. So the first person I tell, other than my wife, that I'm moving to Kentucky is Judy Post. She said, oh yeah, my husband Tom's from Lexington. He went to the University of Kentucky. He was on their swim team, and you know, we're very committed to Lexington. And oh, by the way, Tom's mother died. And I said, well, what the hell is that all about? Who cares whether his mother died? She said, oh, for years Tom has had basketball tickets ever since he's been a student. And he has kept the subscription to the basketball team. Would you like the tickets that he gives to his mother? So for 18 years, we've had Tom post tickets to the basketball games. Tom, by the way, has spent increasing amounts of time here, but we still get offered his tickets. We have the right of first refusal. The second person I tell, other than my wife, that I'm moving to Kentucky is a guy named David Heffernan. And unless you played football in college, you wouldn't know who David Heffernan is. But David Heffernan is an attorney in Miami. He's about 6 feet 7 inches tall, maybe 270 pounds. And I said, Dave, you know, I'm going to move to Kentucky. He goes, my old coach is in Kentucky. I said, really? He said, yeah, my old coach is in Kentucky, a guy named Howard Schnellenberger, who used to be the coach at the University of Miami. He moved to the University of Louisville. And by the way, my best friend moved up there with him. He's now the general manager of a place called Churchill Downs. Would you like box seats to the Derby? So, you know what? I tell 3 people I'm moving to Kentucky. One is my wife. The other 2 are Post and Heffernan. And I have tickets to the basketball team, season tickets, and I have box seats to the Kentucky Derby. So I knew that Kentucky was the right decision for me. Now, it wasn't only that was the right decision, because there was a third part of this story, and that's in the next slide. So the third component of the story is our house. And a lot of what happens, and a lot of what I'm going to show you, a lot of the vignettes actually have happened in our house. But what happened is there was an agent, a real estate agent by the name of Tita Arnold that Emery Wilson had hooked us up with. And Tita insisted on showing us houses in Andover and Hamburg and all these places where there were big houses on very small lots. And we had a beautiful home in Miami on an 1.5-acre lot with the obligatory swimming pool. And I said, you know, this is ridiculous. I want to have a little lot. If I'm going to live in Kentucky, I want to feel like I live in Kentucky. So she started showing us houses that were way out in the country. And we came upon one house where the guy who built it actually was going to put in a racquetball court. And he never built out the racquetball court. So it was a big empty shell. And those of you who know me know that I love to play squash. It turns out that before we moved up here, I had actually been in negotiations with a guy named Gordon Anderson, who is a very famous squash player from Canada, who built squash courts. He built the squash courts at Yale, he built the squash courts at Choate, his company. And I was going to build squash courts on our property in Miami. And Sandy nixed the idea. She said, there's no way I'm going to let you build squash courts. Because all our neighbors had tennis courts. I didn't have a tennis court. I had a swimming pool. Everybody had a swimming pool. But I was going to build a squash court next to our Spanish hacienda, which I wish I had held on to, because we bought it in 1981. We sold it in 1995 for twice what we bought it. It just sold for 10 times what we bought it for. That's a true story. I just wish I had held on to it. In any event, she nixed the idea. Now I find this house in the middle of nowhere, and it's got a squash court. I mean, a potential squash court, and that's exactly what I did, is I built a squash court there. And Sandy turned to me and she said, you know, if I had let you build that squash court in Miami, you would have never left. And there's a good possibility that that was right, that I probably would have never left had I had that. So it's an interesting story. Okay, next slide. So it turns out that I use the squash court a lot, and a lot of the people that we invite here are people that happen to be squash players. This was one. This is Sammy Harik. Many of you may know Sammy. Remember Sammy? He's been here as a visiting professor. Sammy was with me in Miami. He was then the chair of the Department of Neurology at the University of Arkansas, and has recently stepped down and spends half his time in Beirut and half his time in West Palm Beach. But you know, many of the people that I invite because they have to be squash players, like John Trobe and Matt Stern and folks like that, Andy Packner. Okay, and the next slide. So the house has played a fundamental part in recruitment and in bringing visiting professors here and in entertaining. And everybody in the department, I think, at some point in time has been out at the house. As you know, for about 5 years, and I hope to restart it, we have been having an MS meeting here. And among the people that come are Andy Packner, who's on the left, Koto Ramahan, who's in the middle, Doug Jeffries, and Doug Gooden. Jeffries was at Wake Forest. Doug Gooden is at UCSF. Andy is now at Dartmouth. They stay at my house with their wives. So, you know, it's nice having a big empty house in some respects. So they stay there, but they haven't been the only people that have stayed at the house. We've had a lot of people come through. Among the recruits that have stayed at my house are Avi Nath, Miriam Bensalem, Mike Hoffman, Sid Huff, just to name a few. And among the people that have stayed there that have been visiting professors or have been out there are Alan Roper, Marty Samuels, Jay Levy, Stan Krusner, Nobel laureate, Gene Major, Steve Hauser, just to name a few. Okay, the next slide. Now, I'm sorry that Emory isn't here because the chief reason I'm here is because of Emory Wilson. I simply adore Emory, and I think a lot of people who know him feel the same way about him. I used to think, and maybe Phil Tibbs may tell me that I'm wrong about this, I used to think that I was actually selected for this job, but I think that's BS. I think I got it by default because there were actually a number of other people that they brought in before they brought me down here. And I'm very friendly with all of them now. I didn't know them terribly well before. But they include Steve Dukoski and Fred Loveland, who's now at Mount Sinai, and Jerry Walensky, who's at UT Houston. And they tell me that they were all offered the job, but they asked for too much money and too much space. And as a consequence, Frank Butler, who was a cheapskate, had no interest in them whatsoever. And the only thing I asked for was a few lines to recruit into. So my recruitment was without any commitment for space, literally, and $600,000 for recruitment purposes. Well, $600,000 is what we pay assistant professors in neurosurgery these days. So it just gives you an idea how times have changed. Anyhow, that's a true story. Now, more importantly about Emory is this, that I wanted to come to a place where I could trust the people that I work with. In particular, I wanted a dean I could trust. And everybody I met with said, you can if Emory tells you something, you can take it to the bank. And I learned that was definitely the case. And I'll just tell you a little anecdote about this. And one of these days, I'm going to fill a book with all my Kentucky anecdotes. But here's the deal. He wanted a dean of education. So he recruited a neurologist. Some of you may remember Lois. I won't go into a lot of the details, but Anyhow, he insisted on recruiting Lois. That was fine with me. The appointment was going to be in neurology. This was the salary they were going to offer her. She was an EMGer. So she was going to make a lot of money for the Department of Neurology. This was in the days when neurology had to float its own boat. So the first 2 years, we were paying about a quarter of her salary because the estimates were she would make it. Well, she didn't make 1% of her salary. And he had promised me that if she didn't make her salary, the dean's office would make up the difference. So one day, when I'm in the hot seat because the Department of Neurology isn't generating as much money as they thought we should, I sat down with them and I said, look, we have a problem with the dean you recruited. She's not generating any money. And you promised that you would make up the difference if she did. And he said, he looks at me and he goes, do we have that in writing? I said, it occurred to me that I never put that in writing. We just had a handshake. So I said, no, we just did that on a handshake. He said, that's what I told you, that's what we'll do. Money came into the Department of Neurology. And that's the type of person you want to work for. It tells you something, and even if they don't remember it, trust you enough to keep good their word. And it was a tremendous lesson, and I can't tell you how important it was. There's one other important Emory story that I simply adore. So when I was moving up here, the one thing that I wanted was to make sure there was a squash community. That I didn't care about the Jewish community. I really didn't care about anything. I didn't care what the town looked like, which is a funny story because Creed Pettigrew came to pick us up. This is the truth. Creed came to pick Sandy and I up, and I said, Creed, drop me off at the downtown athletic club. And he said, well, don't you want to see the town? I said, show my wife the town. Well, what happened is, I called, Emory said, what do you want to do when you come back up here? This is my second visit. I said, I want to play squash. I look at the itinerary, there's no squash on the itinerary. So I'm going, well, hell, I'll arrange my own squash game. So I called the downtown athletic club. There's a guy named Larry Sharp. He's a very good friend of mine now. He was the pro at the club. I said, Larry, I'm coming up. I'd like to play squash with you. He said, great, come on over at 5 o'clock. Well, the plane landed at 4:30. Creed dropped me off at the downtown athletic club. He takes Sandy around Lexington to show her what Lexington. I didn't care what Lexington looked like. I really couldn't care. And I have a great game of squash. I have a great time. And the following morning, I get to Emory's office, and he goes, where's your squash team? Now, I only brought one change. That was it. And it was beginning to get rank after, a night after I'd sweated into it and sat overnight. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, here's your itinerary. Why are you going to lunch with Bill Schwery for 2 hours? I said, how would I know why I'm going to lunch with Bill Schwery? Bill's back there, by the way. Why am I going to lunch with Bill Schwery? He says, well, you're going to go play squash with Bill Schwery. So I had no idea. So I call up Sandy frantically. She's still at the Hilton up the road. And I said, bring my squash gear down when you come down. So this stinky old squash stuff got stuck in Emory's office, and I always said to myself, if he could put up with my stinky squash clothes, he could put up with me. And it turned out to be the case. So that was the story about squash. The next slide is somebody else who's here tonight. And I can't thank him enough as well, because Dave Watt was Emory's right-hand man. And, I told you, I was stupid. I didn't ask for very much when I came. I didn't ask for any space. There was really no space to be had. They had promised us, we were in stinky offices over in the old PM&R section. They promised us this new clinic, which turned out to be very nice, but we outgrew quickly. But really no research space, and I'd have to go to Dave and say, Dave, you know what, I want to recruit Avi Nath, or I want to recruit Frank Akambi, or I want to recruit Will Maragos. How do I go about it? This is, what they need. This is the equipment they need. This is the space they need. This is the money. He said, don't worry about it. These are good people. I'll take care of it. And I think a lot of the growth of the Department of Neurology is in large measure, at least the initial growth, in large measure due to the assistance that Dave has provided to the department when he was in the role of somebody who could do something about it. Nowadays, we don't have, in my opinion, anybody that really fulfills that role terribly effectively. But that's another story. So the next slide, please. So I want to tell you, and I'm so glad that the Youngs are here tonight. So it turns out that when I was looking at this job, everybody said, Dr. Young, the 800-pound gorilla. He dominates the institution. He's the chair of surgery. He's the head of neurosurgery. And neurosurgery at that time, they'd keep 30 patients in the hospital. Neurology would keep 3 people in the hospital. I mean, it was a very different time. And I must tell you that the relationship that the two of us have had has been simply terrific. He has been enormously supportive of the Department of Neurology, the growth of the neurosciences. He really was somebody who only wanted what was best for the institution. And I think has played a pivotal role in the growth of the neurosciences at the University of Kentucky. So, Byron, I can't thank you enough for all the support that you've provided to neurology over the years. And I'll just give you an idea of how much support that was. Over the years, we have been in bed literally and figuratively with neurosurgery, as 4 of the people in the Department of Neurology have been married to people in so it's been a very close relationship and continues to be under the direction of Dr. Phil Tibbs. I'll tell you one other thing. I didn't have a picture of you, Byron, and so I went to Google Images to find a picture. So I put in Byron Young, Kentucky. 75% of the pictures were Phil Tibbs. That was a very, very different time. And it's unfortunate that it's changed. Because when I first came, it was a smaller institution. The relationship among people was very different, I think. And we would have what was called chairs parties. And Judy Young, I think, was in large measure responsible. And Pat Miller, Frank Miller's wife, and Jim Reed's wife, I think, also played a large part in that. And the department chairs and their wives would get together on a monthly basis at somebody's house, and it would rotate. And it would be the clinical chairs and the basic science chairs. And it was terrific because you got to hear what the problems were, you got to know everybody. It was easy to pick up a phone and talk to somebody because you really knew them. And a lot of things got done behind the scenes. And it's unfortunate that those aren't, it's not the case anymore. Okay, so so this is the next story I want to tell you. And I could tell you many, many stories, but the Berger family has grown since we've been in Kentucky. Now, it turns out that our kids were all born. In fact, our 2 oldest were raised, totally raised before we moved to Kentucky. But there are certain people that have been very, very special to us, and Miriam is one of them. And I'll just go through the story with Miriam, because it's a terrific story. So I get a phone call from a very close friend of mine in Paris, and she said, my brother's best friend's sister is working at a hospital in Paris, and she would like to see what medicine is like in the United States. And I said, oh, that's great. I want to improve my French. This is a true story. So I said, sure, send her. I mean, she'll come spend some time as an observer. So Miriam came. I picked her up at the airport. She stayed in our basement. And, how can you not love Miriam? Really, how can you not love her? And so at the end of this time, I said, why don't you apply to a residency? And she said, well, that's not a bad idea. Why don't I do that? So, of course, she applied to our residency. She had an inside track. Since I was the director of the residency program, I made the rank list. And of course, we've nurtured her career. So she has really been like a daughter to us. Now, I show you this picture because this is a great picture. This is the first time that Miriam's parents met her husband's Bob's parents. And it was at our house, and it was the Youngs and the Bergers, and there were some communication problems because Bob's mother's Korean, Miriam's mother's Bulgarian, her father's Algerian, and Bob's father's sort of like a dyed-in-wool...
Western homeboy.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. So it was a fun time, and she is indeed very much like a daughter to the Berger family. Not that, if I don't give a shout out to everybody, I love you all, but there are some people that the stories are a little different. Okay, so the next slide. So there are some other people that have become part of the extended Berger family. And I'll tell you the story of two of them because both of them are in this picture. Inango Nahari, most of you know, and he's here. The other is Kofi, who's standing behind him. And I'm going to tell the Kofi story first. So our middle son, for a number of years, was with a big law firm in New York. And he decided he'd do a pro bono case. He wanted a pro bono case where he could practice his French and Italian. And he went on a human rights website and he found this story about a young man from Togo who was in a detention center. The young man had witnessed a massacre at an election site. He had videoed it. He'd shown it to the United Nations. He was tortured. He was threatened with death by the Togolese government. And his priest came to him, gave him a ticket to the United States. And Kofi came to the United States with just his passport, no visa, and a Bible. That was it.
Peanuts.
What?
Peanuts.
And peanuts. And Sandy reminds me peanuts. That's all he had. And he came, and without the visa and just this crazy story, they slapped him in the detention center. Very few people ever get out of this detention center. Most of them were sent back to their home. And Mike had to prove, and it's unfortunate, Mike was supposed to be here tonight, but is stuck in Fort Lauderdale. He's on his way actually now. Yeah, he is. Anyhow, he represented him, and when he walked in, he must have been about 26 years old at the time, and everybody in the detention center made fun and said, Kofi, your son, you're going back to Togo, they're going to kill you. They see this young kid walking in. There were only 2 people that year released from the detention center out of 600. Kofi was one of them. Now, after he had Kofi released from the detention center, he said, geez, what am I going to do with him? So he takes him back to his little apartment in New York. He said, Kofi, there's no way you could stay here. You're not going to be able to make any money. I have no room. I'll take you to Kentucky. My parents have plenty of room. And that's what he did. He brought him to Kentucky. So Kofi ended up moving in with us. We ultimately found him an apartment, helped him get a car. He's now working in the Department of Neurology. And Kofi and his family have been members of our family ever since. He's like a son to us. And on was another story. He was one of our residents. He's just the most charming individual imaginable and somebody who gets things done. You talk to him, you'd never believe it, but it's true. I mean, he really gets things done. So the story, and he tells it much better than I, we had Leroy Penix. Many of you remember Leroy in the department. And he had gone to the wedding, I guess, of a cousin of Leroy's out in California. And before he had done that, the week before, the 2 of us were making rounds together. He was my resident. And I was an AIDS doctor, And I said, we should do something for Africa. We should go treat patients with AIDS in Africa. Well, he goes out to this wedding. The next thing I know, I'm getting called by Mother and Children's African Relief Organization and the United Nations. Because he had met some people out there, a woman by the name of Lulu. And he had arranged for them to call me, and they wanted to put together a conference on AIDS in Africa. There had never been a conference in East Africa at this time on HIV. And one thing led to another, and we were in the United Nations building in Ethiopia within a year with a group of people talking about AIDS in Africa, the problem in sub-Saharan Africa, and what we could do about it. And his energies led to the creation of an organization called People to People, which is now a multinational organization dedicated to the care and treatment of people with AIDS in Africa. He has personally sponsored an orphanage in Africa. He's done more for East Africa than anybody I know. He's truly a hero, and he's like a brother to me. So a shout out to you, and we're delighted you're here. The next person, and I don't know why he's here, but next slide, please. Oh, that's just a picture from Ethiopia, but that's on the other slides. Next slide. So is Sid. You know, before he became an anorexic curmudgeon and suicidal, Sid, you know, Sid is just a terrific person. You just have to catch him at the right time. And unfortunately, he hasn't had a lot of those right times. But Sid was a fixture at our house. So 4 nights a week, he would have dinner at our house, and this went on for many years. And he was always somebody that was very special to me in the sense that I could tell him things, and he was a good person to bounce things off of. And I still respect that about him. The next, I told you that a lot of things happen at our house. Does anybody know who this is in the center? Mahari does. That is Kenneth Kawanda. So he's the president of Zambia, had been. He's the same stature in Africa as Nelson Mandela. This is only a Kentucky story. This can only happen in Kentucky. So this is our house. So here's the deal. I get a call from the president's office, I think it was Lee Todd at the time, and they said, would you like to meet with Kenneth Kawanda? He's here speaking about AIDS, and we were looking for people to meet with him. And I said, I would love to meet with Kenneth Kawanda, but I have clinic all day. I'll go to dinner with him. Where are you guys taking him to dinner? And they said, geez, we hadn't thought about that. And besides, he's a strict vegetarian, and he travels with an entourage. If you could take care of his dinner, we would love that. So I actually called my wife up, and this was the conversation. I said, how would you like to meet the president of Zambia? She said, oh yeah, that'd be fun. I'd like to do that. I said, great. Would you like to have dinner with him? She said, oh yeah, that'd be fantastic. I said, he's a strict vegetarian. Do you know any restaurants where I don't know. Do you think you can make dinner? She said, oh yeah, this is 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're having dinner at 6. And to make a long story short, she made dinner for like 15 people, a vegetarian meal. You know, this is, it helps to have a terrific wife who's a great cook and can go flow with the punches. And she made dinner for all these people, and Kenneth Kawanda came out to our house. Now, that would have never happened in Miami or Philadelphia or Houston. That just wouldn't have happened in a big city, only in Lexington. And Kenneth Kawanda sat across the table from me, and he did this. He said, I've been the guest of presidents, I've been the guest of ambassadors, I've been the guest of many people in the United States. This is the first time I've ever eaten in anybody's house in the United States, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. I mean, it's an incredible story. I will tell you another story. I don't have a picture for this. One of the things that's been a disappointment, somewhat of a disappointment, has been the fact that we haven't been able to raise large sums of money from endowments here. And I think there are many reasons for it that I won't go into. But I'll just tell you another great Kentucky story. When I moved here, my family was still in Miami, so I would stay in the hospital till 8:30 at night. And there was a little restaurant called Cleopatra's across the street. It was an Arab restaurant. It was owned by Libyans. And I would go over there and I'd have dinner almost every night. And the guy who ran the place would wait for me, and the two of us would have dinner together, and we'd sit and we'd have Turkish coffee, and then I'd drive out to this cold, big house. It was cold because we'd taken out the windows and done other things to it in the process of revising it. And one night I'm in the office, it's 8:30 at night, the phone rings, I pick it up, and a guy says, is this Jose Berger? Yeah, this is Jose. Sebastian, this is a true story. Because when I was at the University of Miami, the nameplates, because all the nameplates had the doctor's name, the patient's name, I wasn't Joseph Berger, I was Jose Berger. They actually called me Jose Berger in Miami. There's no mystery there, is there? I mean, so I'm thinking it's one of my friends that's playing a joke on me. You know, he's calling me up at 8:30, and it turned out to be a guy who was the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And he was a hemophiliac, and he had HIV. And he had seen everybody for the neurologic problem he was having. And it was a very, very painful condition he had. He had to retire from his company. And he was living in West Palm Beach with his wife. And he said, this is the problem I have, can you help me? Well, I had just gotten approved from the IRB a drug, the ability to use a drug called an omegaconatoxin that you had to administer intrathecally for pain in HIV. So I said, well, geez, you know, you might qualify for this study we're doing. Send me your records. He said, no problem, I'll send them right up to you. The next day, there's a knock on my door. Guess what? It's this guy and his wife. Bob and his wife are at my door. And he brings, I said, I thought you were bringing you're sending the records. He said, I did send the records. Here they are. There are the records. And he gives me the records. And he did qualify for the study. I put him in our, whatever we called it at the time, you know, the clinical research unit. We put a catheter in his back. We administered this drug that made him really goofy and ataxic, but it got rid of his pain. He was there for several weeks. We left it in him. It stayed in him for 6 months. He actually had it taken out when he developed meningitis when he was down in Miami. But he did very, very well. And then a guy named Rick Greenberg, and I think Rick's here somewhere, it was, Rick tuned him up and with antiretrovirals. And Bob, who had a lot of money, oh, well, let me finish it this way. So Bob decided he moved to Lexington. He liked Lexington. And he rented the top floor of the Sheraton, he and his wife. And and Bob became a very close friend. In fact, Thanksgiving, he was in the office the day before. I said, Bob, what are you and your wife doing for Thanksgiving? And he said, we have no plans. And Sandy and I didn't know anybody. This is the first year we were in Lexington. I said, well, why don't you come out to the house for dinner? He says, you know, doctors have never invited me to the house for dinner. So you should do that more often, you know, by the way. Invite the patients you like for dinner. So I invited him over for dinner. He became a very close friend. And he said, I'm changing my trust. When I die, there'll be $1 million that go to the Department of Neurology for your research. That's 18 years ago. Bob's still alive. I call him every year and say, what guy's going on here? I'll be there before you. Okay. Oh, that's it. Anyway. All right, the next slide. You know, I can't get away without showing you this picture. This was taken shortly before Bert Scheinberg's death. Bert Scheinberg was my mentor. He was the chair of neurology at the University of Miami for over 30 years. There are 11 department chairs that came out of the University of Miami. You know, and I'd love to have a legacy anywhere near that, half of that. In fact, behind me is Roger Kelly, who's now the chair at Tulane, and behind Peretz is Bill Weiner, who just died in December, and Bill was the chair at the University of Maryland. Some of you may know Juan Sanchez-Ramos, John probably does, from movement disorders. I show you this picture because people make an enormous impact on your lives. And Peretz was just that sort of person. He was not an easy person. In fact, I was a board-certified internist when I joined the Department of Neurology as a resident. And the first night that I was on call, I admitted 11 patients, 9 of them were Peretz's patients. And rather than call them up after every patient I decided I'd call him up after I'd worked up everybody because I knew what I was doing. And I called him up at 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm sure I woke him up, and I told him about all the patients' capsule form, unlike what we usually hear from our residents these days, at least the junior ones. And he said, okay, and hangs up the phone. And he never said goodbye, he never said, and then I said, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. I woke him up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he just hung up the phone. It was like, bam. Then I learned that that's what he did. He just hung up the phone on people. He never said goodbye to anybody. So then when I realized that, I decided that I would try to hang up the phone first every time I called him. So I'd tell him the case, and then I'd hang up. Get what he had to say. Hang up the phone. And, the great thing about Scheinberg was not only was the guy brilliant, but he was your shield. You could have done something stupid. He calls you in the office, he tells you did something stupid. You walk out the door, and he protected you. In his eyes, you did nothing wrong outside the door. And in my opinion, there are too few people these days that are like that. And I think those are the type of people you like to work for. The people that are going to protect you, the people that are there for you, and the people that have your best interest at heart. Anyhow, I'll tell you another Scheinberg story. I'm almost at the end here. I know I've gone on for a long time. When I joined the faculty at the University of Miami, my primary appointment was in neurology. My secondary appointment was in internal medicine. And I would attend 2 months of the year, 30 days or 31, whatever it was, 24/7 in internal medicine. The Department of Medicine would pay the Department of Neurology $5,000 every year for my 2 months of ward service. That was it. And, that's a lot of work. So Perkins calls me into the office and he said, why do you do this? Why are you attending on the medicine service? And I said, you know why I'm doing this? Because I love it. I love it. I do it because I don't do it for money. I do it because I love it. And it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made, because when I started at the University of Miami, my research was in stroke. I worked with a guy named Myron Ginsberg, and I killed rats. That's a true story. And the department said, Perkins said, we need somebody who does Parkinson's disease. We're in the National Parkinson Foundation building. All these old people have Parkinson's disease that are coming to see us. We don't have a Parkinson's authority. This is before Bill Weiner and Carlos Singer and Stu Factor, before all those people showed up. He said, you're the Parkinson's guy. So clinically, I was doing Parkinson's disease. My research was in stroke, and I was on the medicine service at a time that people, patients and gay men, were coming down with weird neurologic diseases, and we had no idea what they were, and we didn't even know about HIV or AIDS. It hadn't been described. And I reinvented myself with AIDS, and I decided I'm going to be an AIDS neurologist. This is a lot of fun. This is exciting. And the first grant that I wrote was a $6 million program project on the neurologic complications of HIV. It's been downhill ever since. That's a true story. That was like the most money I ever got out of the federal government. And it's been downhill ever since. I fooled the guys at Kentucky. I mean, they thought I was going to bring in tons of money, but it is what it is. And then when I moved to Kentucky, I had to reinvent myself, because Frank Butler said, oh, you're not going to see a lot of AIDS here. And he was right, although I must say that there was substantial, enough really, where you could do research. Nonetheless, I reinvented myself as a MS doctor. And then there was this incredible confluence, because I was a PML and HIV expert, and then natalizumab came around for MS, and now I was an MS expert with all this PML experience. Well, there wasn't anybody else like that, so it worked out great. So there's a lesson here for the junior faculty and the residents. Don't be afraid to reinvent yourself. I'm probably in the process of doing that myself. I'd just like to say something. I'm going to read this because I'll forget it. I don't think I'd be as successful as I've been if it weren't for the wonderful people with whom I've worked. It's a dedicated and talented faculty, a great group of residents, a terrific staff, and there's special shout outs to people like Ricky Mayer and Lucille Lyons, who I hoped to be here tonight but couldn't make it, to Suzanne and Jack Literal and all those other people. I'll tell you one other Kentucky story. Lucille assigned a secretary to me the moment I came, Judy. I won't mention her last name because I'll probably be accused of libel or something. Anyhow, she was arguably the best secretary in the department. So I was in the process of writing a book and doing other things, and every day I'd go to her the first week, and I said, Judy, this has to go out. And the next day I give her a pile, this has to go out today. Wednesday I give her a pile. At the end of the week, there was a pile like this. I said, Judy, this was supposed to go out Monday, and this was supposed to go out Tuesday. She said, oh, Dr. Berger, that's not the way we do things in Kentucky. That's a true story. I said, Judy, Kentucky's just changed. And I said, Lucille, get me a different secretary, will you? Then I got stuck with Janet, who was great until she wasn't. All right, and the next slide. Oh, this is my first day as a faculty member at the University of Miami. I meant to show you that when I was telling you this. And the last slide is this. So Confucius allegedly said, I'm not trying to believe it, find a job that you love and you never work another day in your life. And I will tell you that at least the first 16 years I've done this, it was terrific. And I loved every minute of it. And to this day, there's a lot to love about being a department chair in neurology at the University of Kentucky. I mean, just terrific people and terrific opportunities, and it's been great fun. So that's it.
I was on the search committee for a new chairman of Neurology. And when you're on the search committee, you get a list of the best and brightest people in the country who typically they're not chairman elsewhere. They're people that are moving to chairmanship. They're at a point of their life and they're moving to chairmanship. So we had a short list of people, and on the list was a guy named Joe Berger. And so we divided the list up, and each person got 6 or 8 names, and I had Dr. Berger's name. It was my job to call down to Miami and say to Joe Berger, Dr. Berger, we're looking for a new chairman for the Department of Neurology, and we'd very much like you to come and look at the job at Kentucky. And he said, and I quote you exactly right, you've got to be kidding. It was a long way from Miami to, and by the way, part of the deal was, Jim and Tito Arnold were very close friends of Dr. Young and I, and actually we said to her, we said, after meeting you, we said, you know, he needs a house, but if you can find him a place where he can have a squash court, we've got the deal clinched. And so that did work out. So I just wanted to say, personally, from my point of view, it's been a great pleasure. There's no person more intelligent than Joe Berger. When he sees a patient, the neurologic examination is meticulous. His patients adore him. We've learned a lot from you. We just feel that you've added so very much. I really appreciate when a person is not only intelligent and brilliant, but also has an incredible personality and the bow tie and everything. It's just been, you're a legend in your time, and I want to congratulate you and thank you very much from the Department of Neurosurgery.
Thank you.
I think I know about the history of neurosurgery neurology. I know about the history of neurology and neurosurgery at the University of Kentucky for a long time. And Joe, the department has never been as good as this. When Joe came, faculty members. And I don't think there was much research at all going on. And Joe has built a fantastic department with a lot of research, but just great clinicians, but more importantly, wonderful people to work with. And the bond between neurosurgeon and neurologist is strong, but a lot of the reason is because you recruit such good people to work with such good clinicians. And I really enjoyed working with Joe as a neurosurgeon, neurologist, because he had the confidence in me, I had great confidence in him, and we worked well together, solving a lot of different problems. So Joe, I congratulate you. I think the department is the best that it's ever been, and as good as it could possibly have been.
I really loved I love working with the neurosurgeons here, and really it was, the stage was set by Dr. Young and continued with Dr. Tibbs. At the University of Miami, when you asked a neurosurgeon to help you with a patient, particularly when you asked them to operate on a patient, they'd always try to second guess you. And what was great about Byron is he'd say, geez, you know, Byron, I think this patient needs to be biopsied. That afternoon, they were in the operating room. I mean, it was just terrific. You know, somebody who really trusted your judgment and would do something about it. So,
I'm so very glad that Dr. Bill Tibbs and Dr. Byron Young spoke after Dr. Berger's description that he gave us, because woe be unto the individual who has to actually speak after Joe Berger. So thank you very much, Phil and Darwin, for doing that. So my role tonight is just to simply bring on a few things, which is to say I come to praise Berger, not to bury him, with apologies, of course, to William Shakespeare from Julius Caesar in 1599. So if it's possible, if someone can advance our next slide. Now, the first thing we have to know, we've talked about language tonight, and we've heard a lot of things, and I think it's important to remember that after all, Joe is so fluid with his use of language, and is so erudite, and is so capable of communicating in so many languages, that it's actually very, very important. So I thought we would go through some of the most memorable 5 Bergerisms, if you will, that can sort of keep us in mind about this. So, for example, here's the first one, which is, this is usually the way our grand rounds begins, which is, it's the South, and all of you are laggards. Which means that you're 5 minutes late, you're 10 minutes late, you're 15 minutes late, and you have a cultural bias towards being a little laggardy in terms of the way that you sort of drift into the room. But nevertheless, that's something we're mindful. Now then for the next one, before we advance to that, I have to pause and see, are there any children? The Berger children are now adults, they're not here yet, so we seem not to have any children, so we can proceed on to the next, which is, we've got them by the short hairs. You may be wondering exactly what that means. It's a way of getting one's attention, especially among males, I might say. And for our next one of these, in terms of Bergers that are memorable, it would be he, never of course she, is a real mensch, speaking up. And moving on to our fourth, which is insert name, is not the sharpest tool in the shed. Now, I would ask, has anyone ever seen or heard that before? Perhaps it was. Now, and the number one top Bergerism will be, with the next slide, you got a problem with that? Talk to me. Thank you very much, and I'm sure there'll be many others. As a matter of fact, before I leave the floor, I have a gift that the department is actually bestowing upon Dr. Berger, one of several. So it's difficult to see this, but here is in his 2 favorite roles, that's Superman, wearing, as you can see, the blue tights and the funny little red boots. And then, of course, also with the umbrella drink there on the Miami shores on South Beach right there. It might be right down the way from Coral Gables, just like that.
Yeah.
There we go. from the Department of Neurology.
Thank you. I'm delighted that they actually put clothes on me.
I grew up in Africa. I went to school in Europe, Czechoslovakia. From there, I went to Canada, and the Sloan's family, David and also, they were the one who brought me here. In fact, I was in anesthesia initially. And I think it was in 1995, and that was then Dr. Berger came as a new chair. So I didn't want to go through anesthesia. I wanted to be interested, like, to go to pursue neurology. And my life has changed. I think some people say there are two qualities with different people. Some people are smart, they have the beauty of mind. Some people have the beauty of health. I think Dr. Berger has both combinations. I have never seen, I work now with many people across the globe through the organization. In fact, he is also the co-founder of that organization, People to People, which now works with UN, World Bank, it's in Canada, Sweden, Switzerland, and everywhere. And if it wasn't for him, that organization would have never been established. And he is a guy, you bring an idea, and you never shoot it down. In fact, even with that, the only thing that he will ask you if you work on a case, it doesn't matter how good it is, just respect the deadline. And then you find your name on the article, and when you read the article, you wouldn't find anything that you say. So it is his. So obviously he is my mentor, and I appreciate him as a person. For someone from here in Kentucky or in America to be interested to go to Africa and see patients, I think it is a character, and I think Einstein is also quoted like, I think he said, remember your humanity and you can forget the rest. And when he travels to Africa, it wasn't for money, it wasn't for glory, but I think he's just interested to see neurological progress. And because of his commitment and support, today we have a neurology residency program in Ethiopia. There were only like 5 neurologists. Now we have about 15 neurologists. And the University of Kentucky every Tuesday broadcasts the Grand Round to Addis Ababa University. And in fact, many faculty members have also over the time traveled and were able to teach residents on the spot. So these are rare qualities. I'm so privileged to know you and to consider myself as a family member. And I think at the end of the day, nobody remembers Einstein what kind of car he was driving or how much money he had. But people remember him for his service that he provided to his community.
I just want to say one thing, and that is, it's not that I was instrumental in the development of people, the energies were all anomalous, but I will tell you this, that the Department of Neurology, all of us, collectively, strongly supported people to people, not just as individuals, but when it had no resources whatsoever, when it was seminal, just getting off the ground, I told Inagra, just use whatever you want from the department. So the faxes that went out all over the world, the letters that went out, you name it, it was actually departmental resources that got people to people off the ground. I think in the end it was a small price to pay for what has become a very important organization. So we did it on our own backs. I will say that I sort of facilitated it, but all of you contributed to the development of people to people, wittingly or unwittingly.
I'm just going to read this. I reached for some of our previous residents and to let them know that our chairman was stepping down, and that I was very saddened, and we are all very saddened about this. And so Patrick Mathieson, I'm sure you remember him very well. I think he's class of 2007. He sent me a note, and I'm just going to read it out loud. And so he says that the main thing that he remembers about Dr. Berger is his dedication to the residents and their education. This was best seen at Friday's Chairman's Rounds, which aside from seeing patients, was the most educational experience in residency, and sometimes the scariest, and I think we all as residents felt that way. And he says all the best to Dr. Berger. And Dr. Berger was, I view him and Cindy as my American parents. And you know, their children, Ron, Rachel, Mikey, Cindy, and Joe already have a very special place in my heart and my parents' hearts too. And they're just a wonderful, wonderful family, wonderful, wonderful people, wonderful. Thank you, thank you. Thanks for being here. I just wanted to add, I think I'm the second African in the parliament. I think I was the first observer. Is that right? Is that
That's true. That is actually true.
So Dr. Berger, I'm speaking on behalf of the residents. Really, there's no way to thank you enough for the impact that you've had on our training, on our education. All the residents collectively as a whole are just extremely deeply saddened to know that you're stepping down. You challenged us not only to be critical thinkers, but just purely better doctors. And so we've got you a couple of gifts.
I guess it's not a bathing suit.
Thanks, Pete, for
Here from the audience, there has to be a good reason for going to say that rain and weather and the Super Bowl and Mardi Gras to be here today. And that reason is being here with my family. The Department of Neurology has been very important in my life. Not only for my personal life, because I've been accomplished as a man, as a neurologist, as a professional, but also for my family and for my country, Ecuador. When I go back and think, you know, when you were giving your speech, you're an excellent storyteller. I wish one day I would, you know, speak the way you do and tell all those jokes. You know, I go back and think when I was a kid, back in Ecuador, you know, back in 1974, you know, in a developing country. You know, a kid, you know, my parents, you know, nurtured me, and then when I had all this potential, that I was able to become who I am right now, being able to, I think I'm one of the best neurologists because I was trained here. When I went to Harvard, I knew way more than anybody else, and I put the name of the University of Kentucky very high. And the learning I had through your leadership, through my professors of the department. And anyway, the main reason why I came here is because, you know, you're very important in my life, to my family, and I would like to thank you for all you have done for me. And what you have seeded on me is going to be extrapolated, not only for the patients I treat in the US, but also for my patients in Ecuador and the way that I'm changing the world. And for you and for me, we know that the best is yet to come. This is just the beginning.
Well, I just wanted to, as some of you probably know, Joe's my neighbor as well. I live up the hill and I get to look down at his ginormous house. And his swimming pool is in his squash court. But I wanted to say something about not just Joe as my friend and colleague, but Joe as Don. And, you know, we've all become specialists in our own particular specialty of medicine. But underneath that, we're all physicians. And when my wife was sick, Mary, she had really a minor neurologic complaint, not something that really would bother you, but it bothered my wife, and she went and saw Joe. And I still remember the day. You know, Joe called me in the afternoon. He said, Tony, she's got something. And I think it's probably a brain tumor, but I don't know. And within about 2 hours, we had an MRI that showed that she had a brain tumor. And Joe helped us find a neurosurgeon. We went close to where my family was, but for the next 20 months of Mary's life, Joe was always there when I needed him. Not just as a friend, but also as a doctor. And I think we all need to remember that sometimes we get a little bit blinded. You know, patients are just another car or another machine. They're humans just like us, and they had real lives before they got sick. And Joe was always able to touch that part of the person, not just taking care of them, but also a source of courage and a source of strength. And I think that's his most valuable legacy to all of us, not just the fact that he's wicked smart and that he's a great clinician, but he's also a doctor and a close friend. And I hope, even as he steps down as the chairman, he'll still be around as a clinician, because he's a fabulous clinician. I think everybody knows that, a doctor. Thanks.
I was asked to keep my comments brief, but unfortunately I'm not going to do that. I was also asked not to get emotional, and that would be difficult for me. When you practice neurology as long as I have, you've had the good fortune to work with some wonderful neurologists. None have been better than Joe Berger. And none have been as much fun to work with. What I was actually asked to do was to sing tonight. And I said, well, what am I going to sing? What song will I sing? What would be befitting for someone that I consider a dear friend? I had no idea, so I called Sandy. I said, Sandy, does Joe have a song that he likes to sing to himself? Maybe something he sings in the morning before he goes to work? And she says, by the by, he does. So I said, could you send me those lyrics? And she did. And so, if you'll bear with me, I'll do the best that I can. Oh, it's hard to be humble. Every way, I can't wait to look in the mirror, 'cause I get better look at each day. To know me is to love me. I must be one hell of a man. Oh, it's hard to be humble, but I'm doing